Wicked Lovelies. I'm JJ.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Time.
And you are clocking in for The Witching Hour, a podcast where we've got a lot of opinions and we are not afraid to share them with you. Today, we're going to dive into our very first episode. Super exciting. We've got a hot take, a little talk about mythology, and a review of Brynne Rebele-Henry's Orpheus Girl. So grab your elixir of choice, get comfy, and settle in. We have a lot of thoughts to share. Very first hot take to start off the podcast on a spicy note. Let's talk about book awards and whether or not we agree with them. I hate them and I don't trust them because who determines, first of all, who gets to pick, like whether it's good or not? And second of all, who determines what excellence is?
Yeah, I'll say this. I feel the same sort of way about all awards in every single thing. The Academy, who's the Academy? You know what I mean? And I think that translates everywhere. Like, I don't give a hoot who Nobel is. Why does he get to decide? You know what I mean? And it goes with these book awards. Like, if I read a book and I think it's the best book I've ever read, why is that any different? Why does that have less, flavor than some committee? You don't know what I know. You don't like what I like. Why is my opinion worth less?
Well, so to provide sort of an opposite perspective to that, since my uncle's in the Academy, not to brag, but I know a little bit about how that particular process works. Basically, every year they add more people to the Academy, and one of the things that they've been trying to do lately is trying to make the Academy more diverse by adding more women, more people of color, more voices that haven't necessarily been heard in the past to cast their votes. So there are still a ton of old white men in the Academy, my uncle included, but part of their mission is to diversify the opinions that they are hearing that are casting the votes for the awards. So I don't know how other awards do it. Like, I don't know if there's a Nobel panel of just like 10 people and that they're the same people every year, or if it's like the Academy where it's a committee that they are adding to every year, because there are thousands of people in the Academy. So I don't actually know how book awards work. The other problem with having that many people who can cast their votes, I do think it dilutes the votes. So just because they are adding more women and more people of color, they are still going to be overruled by the majority who are the old white men.
Yeah. And that's like kind of how I feel about book awards, because one of the professors that I just had is on a panel for book awards, and he's an old white dude, and we're talking all the time about needing to have more diversity just represented in general in literature. But then when it's the old white men who are in charge of sending out those awards, the stories that are diverse are not always the ones that are getting like the critical acclaim that they deserve, because it doesn't fit into the box or the narrative of what's been going on for centuries still.
Right, yeah, and I know, like, my thing is I try to honestly just avoid using awards as, like, a metric for whether or not something is worth engaging with. Something I tried to do at the school I worked at was to encourage teachers to use their budget to buy sets of books that they liked. Like, if they read a book, they're like, oh, this is a great book. This amplifies a voice that I think needs to be amplified. Spend the school's money on it, because that's how the publisher knows that this is what people want to read. And so that's something that they look for later when they're publishing new books. And that's, to me, like, that is more powerful to me than anyone telling me whether or not I should read a book or that a book is good. Because I've seen the Goodreads reviews for things, and I don't believe half of them.
Well, Goodreads is a whole other animal. But in theory, the way that the awards work is that they're given out by people who know what they're talking about. But if the people who are giving the awards have a very narrow perspective, they're not going to represent everybody's interests like yours or mine. To us, the awards may not mean anything just because our perspectives weren't taken into account.
Right. Yeah, if you're like an older cishet white man, you are super represented at every award show ever. And you agree every time without fail.
Yeah, and I think also like there's irony also to like what is considered excellence. Like there was that whole thing with that fan fiction, My Immortal, where it was people like ironically loved it and would recommend it constantly. And I think that that kind of has its own like cult following, and those are not represented at all with awards. Like the cult following kind of like does show the publisher or the writer, whoever, like this is what people really want, but awards don't necessarily take that cult following into account.
Yeah. And do awards really mean anything in the grand scheme of things? Because like, even though this isn't technically an award, being on the New York Times bestseller list, every book you pick up in a Barnes & Noble says New York Times bestseller list.
And it's also, this is such a pet peeve of mine, but if your name is as big or larger than the title of your book, first of all, why? Second of all, you're guaranteed to be on either the New York Times or the USA Today bestseller list. So I don't trust you. I'm not going to pick you up. Michael Crichton. James Patterson.
Say his name. Yeah,
James Patterson.
Well, sometimes I get confused because sometimes I think the author's name is the title of the book.
Right.
Because it's massive.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that's a little self-absorbed, self-involved, if you will.
Just a smidge. But also, meanwhile, like, I don't want my name on the cover of my book, and I like have gotten yelled at that I have to have my name on the cover, even though I don't want it.
Yeah, I would love a nameless book. Me personally. You don't need to know who I am. Just read the words.
We'll have to do a hot take on authorial credit in the future.
Including your name on your book.
Excellent. Well, this kind of segues a little bit to Orpheus Girl that we're going to talk about today, because she did win some awards for it the year it came out, and she's younger than me and so much more successful than me, and like I met her at a book signing of this book, and that's how I found it. And it was published in 2019, and she's won some awards for LGBTQ representation, an Indie Next pick for American Booksellers Association. If you're into awards, that kind of adds credibility, I think. I think sometimes the awards can lend, even though I don't agree with them, they can lend credibility when you're like a new author starting out, if your third book is getting critical acclaim.
Well, and it also depends on the awards. This isn't something that we really touched on, but if it's an award for LGBT representation, then obviously LGBT perspective was taken into account, and that was not a panel of old white men making that decision, or at least you hope it wasn't.
Right. Well, and if it was, I would like to talk to those white men, because we need to get them in charge of some stuff.
Right.
Happening.
And I will say, too, that horror awards, for the macabre, if you will, are often ran by, like, queer and queer-adjacent people. So those are sometimes more trustworthy. And also, horror in general kind of sucks. Like, structurally. It's my favorite genre. No one come for me. It's my favorite genre. But, like, in a structural way, it's not the most literal. So I always trust horror awards. Me being a hypocrite right now on the pod.
Well, yeah, like they awards don't count, but like it lends some credibility to her novel.
Right. Awards are meaningless, however.
I could talk for a very long time about horror specifically as a genre and what it can do, like what it does with politics and metaphor and all that stuff. Did I take a horror class? Or was one of my teachers just really into horror? I don't remember.
Potato at that point.
I have a lot of thoughts, and I will dig up my old notes to talk about it.
Right, come back in the future,
but
everybody, for Sarah's take on horror.
All right, y'all, we gotta get into the book. I'm begging.
Okay, well, first, you need to like make sure that you know the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. And if you're listening and you don't know, Orpheus was given a magical lyre, I never know how to pronounce it, by Apollo. And it made him kind of like a siren to everybody who heard his music. Like, it was irresistible. And after this, he meets Eurydice, they fall in love and they get married. And like, just a fun little factoid, the god of marriage is called Hymen, and Hymen was supposed to bless their marriage, but was like, nah, it's not gonna last. So Hymen's like, nope, not gonna last. And then shortly after they get married, Eurydice is in the forest dancing with the nymphs. Some say that a shepherd saw her and like thought she was beautiful and made advances toward her, and then she ran from him. And some say she was just having a good time partying with the nymphs in the forest when she stepped on a snake, was bitten by it, and died.
So wait a second, time out. In the version where the shepherd saw her, How did she die? Same thing? She stepped on the snake while she was running away?
Same thing. Just one is like she's having a good time and this thing happens. The other, she's essentially like running from being assaulted.
Which is crazy. I do want to say Dancing with the Nymph sounds like, one, band name called it. Two, sounds like a code name for lesbianism.
I love it. Dancing with the Nymphs. Actually, that'll apply later to Orpheus Girl itself. So Orpheus, as all men do when they're distraught and their new wife has died, decides to sing about it in like a Broadway musical number. And he's like grieving, and it's kind of sad because his music is irresistible. You kind of have to listen to it even if you don't want to hear this like horrible story. But then that's kind of where I think he just sort of has an idea and things get a little juicy. And he's like, if everybody here listens to my music and is persuaded by me, I'm going to go to the underworld. And I'm going to sing my song for Hades and get my wife back. It is important to note that the only reason Orpheus could even go to the underworld as a mortal is because he was protected by Apollo and the gods. He also, on the trip down there, becomes besties with Cerberus. Like, Cerberus really likes his music and is like, doesn't even try and keep him out. He's just like, hey, friend. Yeah.
I love that.
Like the dog?
Yeah, the 3-headed dog.
Oh, that's so fun.
I know, it's so cute.
I would have given up on Eurydice and just taken Cerberus with me.
Yeah.
Been like, okay, this is my new friend.
Assuredly.
Who needs a wife?
Hellhound or Dancing with the Nymphs. I mean, come on now.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe she didn't even want to be with Orpheus anyway.
Hot take.
Maybe that's why Hymen wouldn't bless their marriage.
Well, yes.
So when he gets to the underworld, he plays a song of grief for Hades and Persephone, and supposedly his song is so beautiful and like so heartbreaking that Hades is like moved. And he's like, yeah, sure, you can take your wife back, but Eurydice will follow behind you as you walk out of the underworld, and you are not allowed to look back at her as you leave. So it's like this ultimate game of like trust and seeing how much faith Orpheus actually has in the gods. And Orpheus is arrogant, probably because he's protected by Apollo, and he's like, bet, easy, I'm gonna do this. So he thanks Hades, he's like, gonna get my wife back, and he turns to return to the living world, but his trust starts to falter because he can't hear Eurydice behind him. But also, like, she's a ghost, so are you gonna hear her? No. And I think Hades obviously knows that. He's around ghosts all the time. So I think Hades did this on purpose. And I also think Eurydice stayed quiet on purpose because maybe she didn't want to be with Orpheus.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of making some sort of noise or communicating that like, yeah, I'm behind you, like keep going, silence. And so Orpheus, he's so dumb. Like just before he's going to leave the cave, he turns around because he thinks Eurydice isn't behind him, and she is. But the minute he sets eyes on her, her shade disappears and fades away, never to be seen again. Isn't that horrible?
Okay, so I've heard a couple of different versions of this. So I've heard that in one of the versions, he makes it out and he's so excited to see her that he turns around, not realizing that they both need to be out before he can look back at her.
Ooh.
Yeah, like his love is just so strong that he's like, look, we did it! And he turns, and then it's like, oops, just kidding, and she disappears.
Yeah.
That's awful.
And then, you know, I've heard the one where she was quiet and he was so afraid that something had happened to her that he couldn't help himself and he turned around. There's a third one that I'm forgetting, but it's all just very heartbreaking. And to me, it speaks of true love so strong that it is stronger than his faith in the gods.
I had never heard about him being out first of the cave and then turning around. But if that is the case, we all know that I'm a Hades girly. Like, I love Hades.
Right.
But he knows what it is to love someone so much that you're going to take them against their mother's wishes. And so, like, you're going to take her away. I'm mad at Hades right now. Oh, I've got some beef with him.
Well, and I do regret to tell you this. He is like Satan. Like, you know, like those are the vibes. And I hate to burst your bubble. And I may be getting shushed right now. I may be getting pulled off stage, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to say my piece. I'm just kidding.
I mean, yes. Like, so that's like also a problem is with retellings and everything, because each author wants to give their own unique perspective to the gods and everything. It like kind of twists it too. Something that I learned actually today that I had not known about this myth was that when he's back in the land of the living, he like plays a mourning song endlessly on his magical God-given lyre. And he's basically in the song like begging to die and like asking to die so he can be with Eurydice. And he does end up being killed. But there are 3 different theories. One, that he's torn apart by beasts. One, that he's torn apart by the Maenads, or he's struck by lightning by Zeus because Zeus is afraid that he's going to tell humans about the underworld and like what it's like there.
Ooh.
The thing that is consistent, his head remains intact, singing forever and enchanting everybody with his melodies. So ultimately, he doesn't get his wife back. He's killed and then used as like a vehicle of music. And when he's dead, his lyre is like cast into the sky as a constellation.
I hate that.
Isn't that awful?
That's so...
I hate that he is still singing his grief song.
Yeah.
Like, to this day.
And I've like...
Wow.
Exactly. And I've never seen anything that talks about like when he dies, like does he ever go back with Eurydice? So like I kind of am of the opinion that Hades was like, no, this is your fate.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like if his head is still around, did he even actually die?
Right.
Like is he in the underworld with Eurydice? Is he in the underworld but they're separated? Because that would be even worse. If he's like, all I want is to die and be back with her, and then he dies and he doesn't get that even then.
Yeah. Well, and something also about the underworld is that sometimes when you die, when your death is connected to something like really traumatic, you'll be taken to drink from the Lathe, which is the river of forgetfulness. That kind of begs the question of like, Eurydice technically has a second death. So if she's taken then to the Lathe, does she even remember Orpheus? Does she even know that he did all of this for her? And if they were reunited in the underworld, would she even know who he is?
Oh, that's tragic. What if she genuinely just wasn't that into him, right? Because, like, when you die and you go into the underworld, there's, like, it's a whole different place. You've got different priorities. Do you really care about some dude? I don't. Me personally? No. And so I feel like maybe Hades was just trying to like protect her a little bit. Like, okay, you know what? We're going to kill him. Don't worry, but we're going to put him somewhere else.
Okay, so now you're on Hades' side.
It's like, oh yeah, this guy's being a creep. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. Don't worry about it.
In relation to that, actually, I have heard versions of the myth where Hades tells Orpheus no. Like, what the fuck are you doing down here? She's dead. She's mine. And Persephone is the one who is like, oh, but he loves her so much. Why don't you give him that chance? And so then she like uses her like feminine wiles on Hades and gets Orpheus his wish.
Feminine wiles goes crazy.
Other band name called it.
Band name, yeah. That's the version I heard when I was in high school. And I liked it a lot more because it maintains the appearance of Hades as being like just a stark asshole throughout it all. Even the caveat of it all where like you can't turn around, dick move. But to me it makes more sense that Persephone would be like, just let them go. And then he'd be like, okay, fine. However, we're gonna make it interesting.
Yeah.
Because he is a dick.
Yeah. He's like, welcome to the Hunger Games. Go on. Just don't turn around.
But I am on his side. But I am right there because I think Eurydice needed to be freed.
Hashtag free Eurydice 2024.
Exactly.
That's so interesting because I am such a romantic that I am absolutely on Team Orpheus.
I mean, I for sure understand why. Like, I'm not... If I had more information... Right? If I could see the court documents for a second, I could go either way, quite frankly. But I am sick of men just walking into places and expecting to get what they want.
That's fair.
So for that reason, I'm out.
When you put it like that,
it's a man going to another man for a transaction of a woman.
Right.
But that's just how things were back then.
I think I'm not on Orpheus' side anymore. I'm not on Hades' side either. Maybe I'm just Team Cerberus.
Right, yeah.
The nice man plays good music.
Yeah. Have either of you seen Hadestown? Or heard of Hadestown?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it and I want it real bad.
I've listened to the soundtrack a lot.
I haven't even done that. My parents saw it and I watched a video essay about it. But that is also the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. I want to see it.
Yeah, it's like Orpheus and Eurydice, but also Hades and Persephone and dealing with like power struggle and marriage. It's so good.
That's good stuff right there. I'm signed up.
You mentioned something about Orpheus being like a Broadway something before, so I was like, oh, hello? Are we going to talk about Hadestown?
Oh, well, no, I'm just saying like what man doesn't perform a High School Musical number when his wife dies?
Right. Like we've all been there.
Right, but
Yeah.
but Hadestown was literally on Broadway.
Right,
That's my
right,
point.
right.
I feel like people are going to be mad if you're like, oh, he does a Broadway number now that his wife died.
And then we
like,
don't
so you're not going to talk about the literal Broadway musical? Yeah.
Your brain connected that way better than mine did. So everybody, Sarah gets a gold star today.
I didn't even meet you halfway on there. I was still confused until about 3 seconds ago. You win.
She's like Broadway. I'm like, yeah, High School Musical. No.
Yeah, singing like Broadway. Come on.
Orpheus is Troy Bolton. Thank you very much.
Right.
So transitioning to Orpheus Girl.
Yeah, let's talk about the book.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So Orpheus Girl does have some content and trigger warnings for anybody who is interested after this conversation and wants to read it. It does cover homophobia, starvation, conversion therapy, physical and psychological torture, including electroshock therapy, misgendering, self-harm, and attempted suicide. So just make sure that if you are interested in the book, you go into it aware of those things. And if at any time while you're reading, it becomes too much, honor your body, honor your mind, and step away from it. It is a YA book as well, and it's short also. It's 160 pages. It focuses on a 16-year-old girl named Raya who lives in rural conservative Texas, which means we all know how it's going to play out. The minute you learn about rural Texas, you're like, great. So Raya is in love with her best friend, Sarah, and the two are outed after they share a kiss. They are sent to a re-education camp called Friendly Saviors. And the goal of this camp is to quote unquote fix them and turn them heterosexual as is intended. It's classified as re-education, but the girls and the residents of the camp are abused under the guise of treatment and making them better, including electroshock therapy. One of their friends ends up dealing with so much depression from obviously the treatments that he does attempt, and he does survive. And it's at Friendly Saviors that Raya is like, I'm going to take on the role of Orpheus and I'm going to go deeper into the belly of the beast and save Sarah, my true love, from death and take her out of the underworld. Some things I liked about it: love a good Greek myth retelling. And I think it's very fresh and original that she did an LGBTQ take on it instead of the usual het cis man going after his woman and, everything. There are so many parallels within here that she actually created an index at the back of the book so you can understand better how each character plays into the story, with the exception of Grammy. And Grammy's a bitch, but we'll get to that.
Fuck Grammy.
Oh, God, Grammy. She literally, you can tell she's from West Texas. There is this moment that I think is really beautiful. I mean, it's definitely tragic, but it's a very beautiful show of accepting yourself and your true identity, where they want all of these attendants of the camp to realign with the expected societal gender norms and roles and appearances. And Raya actually sneaks into the boys' bathroom and shaves her head because she refuses to conform to their gender expectations and she refuses to play their game. And so if she shaves her head, they can't force her to look the way they want her to look and to act the way that they want her to look. And it's kind of this reverse Samson moment where she loses her hair and actually gets strength from that. So she's kind of allowing herself to kill off a part of her identity that is still important to her, but she's further embracing a part of her identity that is more important to her, and that's her sexuality and being in love with Sarah, her best friend.
Is that in the index the Samson parallel?
No, that's just a thing that I had noticed when I was reading it. Anytime anybody cuts hair, my brain automatically goes to Samson and Delilah, but it was a complete role reversal, which I thought was really cool because she literally shed a part of herself and then became someone stronger for it. They do escape, which is another good thing I like, because I feel it can be really easy to kind of sit in the trauma of what happens there. And from people that I know who have been in really painful situations like that, it can be really easy to kind of give up and give in. And Sarah does kind of get to that point where she is just kind of ready to whatever happens. She stops eating. She really kind of stops fighting, and Raya starts fighting for both of them. And so even though they do escape, the ending is sort of ambiguous, kind of in the same way we talked about Orpheus and Eurydice. They get out for sure, and they are leaving all of that behind. But some of that ambiguity comes in us not knowing who they've become after they've left, and like what sort of things they've internalized and what sort of things they are going to have to fight against for the rest of their life in order to embrace who they view themselves like to truly be in the aftermath of everything that happened at Friendly Saviors. It is mentioned like toward the end that they underwent enough electroshock therapy that they will always have these like after effect zaps and buzzes like for the rest of their life. And so I kind of wish that we could have some sort of an epilogue for closure to get an idea of where they are and to like know that they're either okay or processing through and that they are like thriving after everything. But yeah, they escape, and it's a much happier ending than Orpheus and Eurydice. Kind of like the author setting it right.
I do like that. I do also feel like, though, they probably wouldn't stay together. Like, after having been through that trauma, either you're trauma bonded or when you look at the other person, it reminds you of what you went through.
Right.
And also, they're kids. So, like, how many people actually end up with your high school sweetheart, you know?
Right.
Some, sure. But I feel like, and this is me reading into it as someone who has not read the book, I feel like after everything that they went through, they would try to stay together, but ultimately, because of what happened, because of the horrors that they endured, their love would not make it. Mm-hmm. Just like Orpheus and Eurydice. I think that ultimately they would end up having to find their partner elsewhere.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, maybe the looking back happens after the story's over.
Oh,
I like that.
Tagline. Woo.
Yeah. Somebody get Brynne Rebele-Henry right on the phone.
Right on the phone.
Got a new marketing tactic. Cool thing also is that Brynne wrote this, I believe, when she was 18. It was published when she was 20. So it was like kind of like writing from experience of things that like she saw her friends and herself and other people going through, and not like looking back later on to find like the truth or to have lost something. Like it was still, I think, very resonant to her and her life, at least like from my understanding from things that I've read about her and heard about her. And so I think that also makes it more of an impactful story because she's not like 40 writing a story about being 16.
Right. This is okay for like an 18-year-old to write something so like, I hate using the word deep, but like to write something that has genuine substance to it and is also like a queer retelling of a classic Greek myth. That's like a lot. That's an accomplishment in of itself.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I will be reading this.
I highly recommend. I do want to point out a couple things I don't like though. One of the things, it's very complicated like and dislike kind of thing. I think that it is important that these like re-education and conversion camps are exposed. And I really like how that was handled because that is something that does need a lot more airtime than anybody's giving it. I don't like the brutality that is experienced and outlined in the book. And that has nothing to do with like the writing. It just has everything to do with knowing that people really go through that. And I hate to know that like humans are inflicting pain and torture on other humans because they don't fit inside the box that they think they should fit in. And so it's like really complicated because I really like the way that she approaches all of that, but I hate that it even exists to be written about in the first place.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's really hard to portray like such an injustice so candidly, and it's hard as an audience member to consume that a lot of the time. But I'm honestly so glad that like this was explored in this way because it's a really important part of like queer history, especially in the US, where like we really love our conversion camps. We love them.
Yeah, and she doesn't really gloss over either. Like it's not like you're there and then you see like a second of like the beginning and then all of a sudden you're at the end. Like you sit in that for a majority of the novel, which I think is very important. She doesn't gloss over anything. Yeah, I mean, to be 18 and be writing about that and exposing it in that way is insane to me. Props to her. I really hope that she like continues to write and does just amazing things in the industry.
Has she written anything after this?
Not after, but before. I want to say this was her 4th publication, and she before this had done poetry collections. Like super talented. Like this came out in 2019 and I think her first book came out in 2016. So she was 17 when her first was published.
That's crazy to me.
But it's been 5 years since she published that. So that's what I'm kind of I'm kind of surprised that this was it.
Yeah. I mean, I know, like, I followed her on social media. She was doing a lot with Orpheus Girl for a while, so I'm not sure where she's at now. I want to say that she had kind of hinted that she was working on a few new projects, but I would be interested to go look back and see if there's any updates of anything coming soon. I didn't see anything when I was doing just like a preliminary search today to make sure that like she hadn't published anything since, and I hadn't seen any announcements of anything. Also, we need to talk about Grammy real fast because Grammy's a freaking bitch. Okay.
Yeah, what's up with Grammy?
So Grammy is
Who
the
is
Grammy of Raya. Raya, her mom had her young and then like dipped and just left her with Grammy. Grammy already didn't like the way that Raya's mom was turning out, and her husband died when she was like 27. So her husband dies, her daughter grows up and like in her eyes is a failure. And then she has a daughter young, and now she's taking care of her daughter, who again, like if you're looking at Raya through Grammy's eyes as like her second chance, like her second chance is also ruined because Raya's not fitting in the perfect box that she wants. Raya's mom is like a soap opera actress. And like at the beginning of the book, they're watching her on the soap opera playing Aphrodite. So it's very weirdly meta, kind of, except that her mom's counterpart in Greek mythology is Calliope and not Aphrodite. So I'm not quite sure where the whole Aphrodite thing comes in, unless it's just that people would recognize the name.
What is this soap opera, though?
Never, a name's not given. At least not that I'm remembering.
What's a soap opera? Wait, is her... Okay, hang on. Is it a soap opera like about...
What's a soap opera?
No. I know what a soap opera is. Is it a soap opera about Greek gods, or is her name just Aphrodite on the soap opera?
I think her name is just Aphrodite. It's one of those things that the whole time I was rereading it, and even like the first few times that I read it, I still don't get a firm grasp of like exactly what is happening. But her mom being on screen happens multiple times throughout the book.
Well, so I have a couple of thoughts about that. One, I would love a soap opera about the Greek gods. That would be everything. Two, if the mom's counterpart in Greek mythology was Calliope, they should have just called her Calliope, because in Grey's Anatomy, there's a character named Calliope. Yes. So that would have been real easy right there. Just be like, oh yeah, her mom is just casually Sarah Ramirez, but also isn't.
So actually we do learn that Raya's mom's name is Callie.
Oh. Well then that's the parallel then.
Right, yeah, but what I'm saying is the parallel of her playing Aphrodite. Like Aphrodite has no connection to the story of Orpheus and Eurydice.
Yeah, that's a weird choice.
Okay, so this is what I think. Happened. So Calliope is her mother, right? And that is a correct parallel. Yes. Okay, but she needs a job, so she is an actor, and the character she's known for is Aphrodite. That doesn't mean anything. Like, I don't think that has any holding on anything. I think the reason why she plays Aphrodite is because that is a name that everyone would recognize.
And that's like what I'm like questioning, you know? Like,
I have a little bit of a problem with that. I don't love that.
Yeah, I think Aphrodite's a little overrated.
Personally, I have a
that's a separate issue.
Okay, what's your issue?
I think Aphrodite's really cool because she is descended straight from Ouranos. She's the same generation as Kronos and the other Titans. She's not one more down like the rest of the Olympians. I think that's pretty cool of her.
She's one of my faves. My problem is that everyone focuses on her, and like while she is cool, there's like quite literally a pantheon of gods to talk about.
Like, I've never seen a story about Hestia, but like, please, like, I don't need another Aphrodite story. I want to know about Hestia.
That's where I'm at. So, like, overrated doesn't mean she sucks. It just means that she's overrated.
I don't know how to get, honestly, I don't know how to feel about Aphrodite. Like, objectively, because she is kind of a villain in my story. Like, I really don't have an objective, like, third-party opinion of her because I'm like too close to my story right now. Ask me in a couple years and I'll let you know. But like, I really do want a story about Hestia. Like, I feel like she is so overlooked and like, she's the goddess of the hearth. I mean, you could do some baller stuff with that.
Yeah, like a slice of life.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is that it wouldn't really be baller, would it? Like, she's the one who stays at home. Yeah, she's cozy, she's warm.
But that could be baller in terms of like, she doesn't do much.
Yarn ball.
She's yarn baller. Rumpelstiltskin who?
It could be, right. I could honestly see like a story of her, like those cozy murder mysteries that have recipes in the back of the book. One of those.
Same. And I love those. Please. I would read the heck out of that
eat
story.
them up.
I'm just saying that's not baller.
But who determines what's baller? Let's go back to the book awards.
We do on our pod, the Witching Hour Book Awards, whether or not something is baller.
Well, we can all agree though that Grammy is not baller. Okay, she's a bitch. She sends Raya to the camp and then doesn't talk to her, goes and gets remarried to some dude named Paul from church, and then calls Raya to be like, hey, Paul and I got married. And Raya's like, you could have waited till I got back. And her grandma like admits that she doesn't think she was ever going to leave the conversion camp. Oh. And Grammy doesn't have a parallel in Greek mythology, so she's just a bitch. Like, there's no purpose to her other than just being a vehicle for hatred, which honestly, like, fair. That needs to happen, but that's all she is. She sucks.
She serves the plot, not the myth.
Right. I think because there's that extra layer of queer youth struggles that there needed to be like an added conflict.
Yeah, like she doesn't know who her dad is. Her mom is playing Aphrodite on TV. And so the only person she has is her grandma, who hates her and then marries Paul. Also, I do feel like the name Paul was intentional in the same way that there's like the mirror of Samson and Delilah. Paul having written so many books of the Bible, I think that was intentional, that she sends her granddaughter to conversion camp and then marries like the pinnacle of Christianity.
I believe it.
I think I was just having this conversation yesterday with one of my friends that every time there's a name in a piece of text that is biblical, I automatically assume that it's a symbol, like it's intentional, and I immediately will read so far into something. So don't just name a character Michael just for funsies. I'm gonna think you're talking about Michael.
What about Sarah?
Ooh.
No, sorry. I'm gonna think about you. I'm gonna think about you.
That's valid, but also Sarah's literally like, she's not quite the first woman, but she's one of the oldest Old Testament
She's like
names.
a step away from
she's
Eve,
up there.
basically.
Yeah. She's like the next, well, I guess Lilith's in there too. Yeah. So she's like the third woman.
Second runner-up woman, Sarah.
Also, just total side note, if you're going to name your character Jesus, make sure that you give a pronunciation guide at the beginning, because I will be calling your character Jesus. And
yeah. And that is unfortunate, but that is the way.
Also, the reason why I brought up Sarah is not because I'm a narcissist. It's because the love interest is named Sarah in the book.
There are like so many biblical parallels to this as well.
Great point. Didn't even...
You thought I was just talking about myself.
Well, yes.
No!
Well, yes, I did.
Anyways, so yeah, that's Orpheus Girl. I give it a 5 out of 5 stars. And this is like my 5th or 6th time rereading it, and it only gets better. Like every time you read it, there are just so many layers that you can peel back. It's like a new read each time.
5th or 6th time. Yeah, we gotta read
and I don't just like reread books for funsies. I mean, I do, but like not to talk about on a podcast.
Yeah, because the point is to read for funsies. Yeah, 5 out of 5. Wow. I for sure am going to be reading this. It sounds like a quick read. Sounds impactful. Sounds traumatic. Everything I'm looking for in a book, quite frankly.
Checks all the boxes. If you're an audiobook girly, it's 4 hours long.
Oh, that's nothing. That's a trip to the store.
Nice little walk around Target with a coffee.
Exactly. A 4-hour lap around Target.
Get your steps in, get some trauma.
So I'm going to be a little bit controversial and say that I don't think I'm going to read this, just because I think it sounds fantastic from a literary standpoint. However, I think it would be too difficult for me. I do not enjoy reading very heavy books. Even in fantasy, I don't like when, like in Throne of Glass, the whole last book is just war. And I had a really hard time getting through it because that's not why I'm here. Mm-hmm. I don't mind, like, a battle here and there, but when it's just the trauma of war, all my friends are dying, everything is terrible, I'm not having fun anymore. And I don't think that reading just needs to be escapism, but I also know my limits, and I think that this, regardless of how high quality it is, I do not think that I would gain enough from it to offset the terrible time I would have reading it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's fair. And I think that's why it's important to like know your content and trigger warnings, not just about this book, but like any, because even if you go into a book thinking that you're prepared, like knowing your limits and knowing like if when you're reading that you start to hit a limit, it's okay to DNF. Like it's okay to walk away. And it's also okay to say that you're not going to read something because you know your mind and you know your comfort level and it's just not in it. So I respect that. I respect that you're like, no, I'm not reading it.
I think for me, I'm very like, I like to interact with content that's going to hurt me. Like not in like a weird way, but I don't know. I don't know. I like, I mean, there are a lot of times where I'm like, can I please not sob? Can I please not have to go look in the mirror and cry looking at myself after interacting with this media? But sometimes I do want to do that. So I think this book will be great for me to put on my shelf. And then when I have one of those days, I can be like, it's time to look in the mirror and cry while looking at myself.
Yeah, I do love a little bit of sadness. I love a lot of sadness. Like if someone's like, it's going to destroy you, you're going to sob, give it to me. I'll listen to it. I'll watch it. I'll read it, whatever.
I'm reading it that night.
I mean, listen, I'm
like, wow, I shouldn't listen to this. And then I do. And then I'm like, oh, I really shouldn't have listened to this.
Yeah, that's something that I've had to learn a lot about in the last couple of years, just because I have had a very hard time in my personal life. And I have sort of had to just be a little bit more conscious about the media that I consume, just because I have been in a very fragile headspace. So yeah, maybe in a couple years when I'm not so sad already, I'll try a sad book like this one.
But if not, that's also still perfectly fine.
Everyone, we could all learn a thing or two from Sarah. Pay attention to your boundaries, please, I beg.
Anyway, okay, well, thanks for clocking in for the Witching Hour. If you want to share your opinions on our opinions, you can check out our social media over at Spellbound Publishing House. Any notes will be in the show notes, and we'll see you next shift.
Bye.